Are we on? Good evening. Hope everyone out there is okay and doing all right, given all the corona. And yes, we're live streaming from the shed, and we were on some new technology tonight, so hopefully it should be in a lot better resolution. If you click on the little geary thing, you should be able to change it to 720p, which should help. And just let us know if any of the sound, or it's starting to get a little bit choppy or something like that. Just let us know how that's going, and we'll do our best to sort that out. Just trying to figure where the chat is. Restore chat. There we go. Okay, so. This is going to be a little bit different from the last stream in that it's basically just going to be me sat here talking a load of nonsense, which last time was a bit more video based and stuff like this. This is going to be a little bit more sort of concept based. But before we get into that, what we want to do is just say thank you to everybody out there for tuning in, for supporting us, and for donations. Your donations have made the technology here possible. And so we're running on just a cheap PC at the moment, but it's got a bit more processing power, and that's helping with the streaming. So so thank you all to those who've donated. Obviously, we're going to try and keep doing this going forward, but you know it does sort of depend on whether it's sort of financially viable for us, and you know, so your donations do make that very possible. So thank you very, very much. If we do go forward, we may look at like doing some kind of like sort of subscription-based service and things like that. But basically, the kind of the arrangement as it is that just feel, you know, if you feel like you've got some benefit from it, like at the end of the month, just give what you can. Anything is gratefully received. And don't feel like you have to donate after every single stream, unless, like I say, you get some kind of pleasure out of it. So, so thank you very much. A few people in the last stream and privately and stuff have asked about merchandise. This is kind of like in the pipeline. Looking at getting some like print on demand type sort of hoodies, t-shirts, and stuff like that if people want them. Somebody mentioned about me having my face on it and having "Is it on" as the tagline. That's not going to happen, I'm afraid. I might do that as a special limited edition, just one-off for Chris. But yeah, we one of my clients is working on like a web shop for me in order to do that, and so I appreciate that. So yes, so it's sort of starting to come together. We don't want it to get like too big and too professional here. We don't like that. But yeah, it's all starting to build a little community, which is nice, and it's nice to see the same faces out there every time. And I hope it's of great benefit to you. The same customer actually said that I'm starting to sound a bit like a cult leader. At least I think that's what he called me. In that I'm, you know, online sort of preaching to people, asking for donations and making them buy stuff. So yeah, we're trying not to become a cult here. Just do it and try and enjoy some bonsai and kind of like get my kind of ideas and philosophy about bonsai across to people. Which is kind of like what we're going to talk about here today, because we mentioned it in kind of some of the topics we're going to talk about today have been covered in previous streams, like the maple pinching, particularly talking about thinking about where the energy in the trees going and where we want to push it and things like that. And it's definitely going to be coming up in the next stream, which is going to be about candle pinching on pines, in particular Scots pines and Mugo white pines, so the single flush pines, which the only ones that we deal with here. And everybody's kind of like their candles are beginning to extend out, and they're like everybody's on the verge of wanting to pinch, and so we're going to look at how we do that. And so before we got kind of like get into that, and rather than repeating myself every single time, it's just kind of like cover the basics of kind of like energy management and stuff. So so yeah, we'll look into all the nuances of that, Dean. But yeah, so we're going to cover that kind of stuff going forward, and like pinching of beach. Some people have asked about pinching of beach and things like that. That will come in time. You know, beach is just really sort of starting to open up, so we've got to let them open up and extend, and we'll look at like how they use their energy and what we'll be doing with that energy in a future stream. And so this is kind of like an introduction to all of that. But before we sort of get into this, and I don't want to make it become sort of too complex and too difficult to understand, but where I come from, like my way of thinking has been massively kind of shaped by the fact that I studied physics at university many moons ago. I studied physics and astrophysics at Leicester University, big up to Leicester, and I just about scraped a degree. It was very difficult, as you can imagine. I was very good at the concepts behind it, but not very good at mathematics. In order to be very good at a high level in physics, you have to see things mathematically. You have to understand the mathematics behind everything, and you have to have a certain part of your brain has to function in that way. And mine didn't. Okay, so like A level, like up to 18, 19, I was okay with it, but then once you got into like the higher level mathematics, it just I couldn't do it. But the concepts and things were something that really appealed to me. And a couple of things that I studied there, well, a lot of things actually that I studied there, still kind of like affect the way in which I look at bonsai and affect the way I look at the universe. The reason why I sort of studied physics was, you know, I don't want much in life really, except to understand how the universe works. It's not really too much to ask, but physics was the way, at least then, that I saw of trying to achieve that goal. Subsequently, I realised it wasn't necessarily the path for me, and eventually I found my way into bonsai. And bonsai now is the kind of like the prism, or the you know the way in which I look at the universe and things. But a lot of my thinking has been shaped by those 4 years studying physics, and so some of the concepts that I'll actually talk about will be a little bit about that. And might be some terms and things that you start to think like you're back at school and things like that. But bear with it. We'll try not to make it too complicated. One of the things that one of my lecturers said at the end of quantum mechanics, kind of like the first introduction to quantum mechanics, was handed up anybody who understands quantum mechanics. And it wasn't that difficult to begin with. And so a few brave people kind of like put their hands up and said, yeah, I think we understand it. And he just pointed to everyone and said, you're all liars. Okay, if you truly understand something, you can explain it to a 7 or 8 year old child without using any jargon, and just get to the real heart of the matter. And I'm not saying that you're 7 or 8 year old children, or if you are, you should be in bed. But we're going to try and make it simple and just kind of like get to the essence of what we're talking about without using too many sort of scientific terms and things like that. But there might be a few little weird things that you kind of like going a little bit like that. So we'll try not to go too far down that path. But understanding kind of like what energy is kind of like fundamental to what we're talking about within bonsai, and how I view bonsai as a system, self-contained system, because bonsai is in itself an entirely self-contained system. Okay, and so it's the universe, it's nature in a self-contained unit, and so it's very easy to kind of look at it and see how things work. You know, we're kind of almost separated from the larger world, and we're in a lot more control of everything. Okay, and one of the secrets that I'm going to teach you today, or let you in on, is that everybody who does bonsai has some type of kind of like psychological problem, in that we have control issues, and we want to try and control everything, and we have this just desire to control things. Okay. And basically what we're doing with bonsai is controlling energy within the tree. Okay. There's one fundamental law of physics that has yet to be proved to be wrong, and current thinking is will never prove to be wrong, and that's the conservation of energy. Okay. And when you understand to a deeper level kind of like what the conservation of energy law means, it actually kind of will blow your mind a little bit, just when you start thinking about it. And that says that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only ever be transformed from one form into another. Okay, and when you kind of like trace all the sort of the transformations of energy back, it just goes. And if you think about, for example, your car, okay, the forward motion of your car when you put your foot down on the accelerator is achieved by chemical reactions, the changing of chemical energy in the petrol into forward motion. Where does the petrol come from? The petrol comes from oil, which came from algae, and their energy was generated by the sun. And so you go back through all of these different sort of chains of how the energy got converted from one form into another, and it's really quite a sort of like I say, it kind of like blows your mind a little bit when you think about it too hard. So I try not to think about it too hard. But within our trees, that holds true. Okay, and we need to look at kind of like what is going on, the transformation of energy and how it gets transformed, what it gets transformed into, and then how we can use that to our advantage. Okay, I said like in the little promo thing that I was going to distill what bonsai is down into a single sentence. Okay, and I wrote it down on a piece of paper. I can't find it, and so what I did is I made this. Okay, this is my basically kind of like approach to bonsai in a sentence. That is the practice of bonsai is the generation and redistribution of energy in order to achieve an aesthetically pleasing form. And that's all there is. That's all we do in bonsai. We grow our trees, we cut them back, we grow them, we cut them back, we allow them to open up, we allow them to generate energy, we allow them to store that energy in the roots, we cut the roots, we ask branches to grow, we stop branches from growing in a way that will make it pleasing to us as human beings. Okay, so once you start getting into the aesthetically, I spelled aesthetically wrong. Once you start getting into the aesthetically aesthetics aspect of it, then it starts getting deeper. Once you start getting into the techniques of how you generate or how you redistribute the energy, it starts getting deeper and deeper and deeper. But fundamentally, when you take it all the way back, right to that point, that's all we do. We grow the trees and we cut them back. We let them generate energy, and then we tell the tree where we want that energy to go. That's all we're doing. Okay, and so understanding that for me, once I came to that point, was like a light bulb moment for me, and that took like 6 years of apprenticeship, a couple of years of kind of like working by myself, and it took a long time for me to kind of get to that point. All right, and I'm happy to share that with you. I say it to a lot of people in my regular workshops. So all I tell people this idea, and I talk about it because it's this is how I view it, and this is how it makes it easier for me to understand. And I'm quite happy to share that with you, because there's a difference between, say, just knowing it, and you can go off tomorrow and say, oh, bonsai is the generation and redistribution of energy in order to achieve an aesthetically pleasing form, and you know it, but it took me that long to understand it. Okay, hopefully it will take other people less time to understand it and actually sort of put it into practice, and maybe people won't necessarily look at bonsai through that way. Okay, maybe you kind of like look at it through a different prism, through a different way, because this is basically based on my past experiences, my the way in which I thought previously, my philosophy, etc. So it might not hold true for anybody else, but as I said, this is kind of like fundamental to talking about other things going, the beach pinching, the candle pinching and things like that. And so it's a kind of a good idea to get this out of the way first. Okay, so that's basically what we're doing in a nutshell. And so if you think about what's going on in the tree itself, okay, and we go back to that idea of everything is just being converted from one form into another. Okay, we all know how trees generate their energy, okay, which is by photosynthesis in the leaves. Okay, sunlight is incident, so sunlight hits the leaves, chemical reactions happen within the leaves, and sugars and starches get generated. So the sunlight gets converted into sugars and starches. They get transported to other areas in the tree, and they get used in different ways. They get used to put on roots, they get used to put on Foliage, that foliage with a deciduous tree will die, drop off, so that some of that energy drops off, goes back into the soil, turns into organic matter, starts to decay, gets eaten up by trees again. That energy then goes back into the system. Okay, particularly when we're thinking about trees in the wild. Okay, or if the tree dies, falls over, 1,000,000 years later, 10 million years later, it's coal. Okay, so it's just this constant kind of conversion of energy from one form to another. Okay, so if we can understand that, then we can understand like how we can then sort of push it to those areas that we want it in order to achieve our aesthetically pleasing form that we wish to. Okay, so the conversion of energy happens in the trees, the generation of energy happens in the leaves. Okay, and so photosynthesis is the fundamental kind of energy production. Okay, that's the only area where it's the only thing that the tree is able to generate any energy from. Okay, and there are a lot of things which affect photosynthesis. Okay, so we could talk about the transport of the amount of water that's going in through the tree, the resources that are available. Okay, but so we'll just break it down, make it as fundamentally simple as possible. Where the tree has enough water, it has enough nutrients within the system in order to survive. Okay, so what is the major factor that increases or decreases photosynthesis? Sunlight. Okay, so the amount of sunlight that is incident on a tree is absolutely essential for the generation of energy, and therefore how much we can then redistribute it. And so we look at trees, particularly in Northern Europe, in the UK in particular, we look at trees, for example, that get developed in Spain or in Japan, and we look at the techniques of those people working in Spain, in Japan, in California, Florida. Okay, and we say to ourselves, why can't we do that? Why are the trees here so backwards? Right, try going even further north. Try going up into Norway, northern parts of Norway. Right, you'd be lucky if you get that much kind of growth in a year. Okay, and it's all to do with the incident amount of sunlight. So the amount of sunlight that hits the leaves is one of the biggest factors of that. Okay, the rate of photosynthesis goes up and down with temperature, and there are a lot of other factors. So once the temperature starts going really, really high, photosynthesis drops off. There's like there's a peak point like with temperature. Okay, but we're not ever really going to reach that here, so we don't have to worry about it too much. Dave in Spain might, these things begin to come into play. It's a way of the trees kind of like regulating its energy intake, and there's lots of other things that are going on. Okay, it doesn't want to get too hot. It concentrates on keeping itself cool once it gets up to a certain temperature and things like that. Okay, but essentially, the more sunlight that hits the leaves, the more energy gets generated. Okay, we have 40% less sunlight in the UK than they do in Spain, and it's not necessarily about the days, right? Or the length of the days that's important. Okay, so you could argue, like we have very long days in the summer, and we have some nice sunny days, but the intensity of that sunlight is lower, right? And so the function of the amount of energy that gets generated in the leaves is dependent on the intensity of the sunlight. Okay, and we know how you can feel like the intensity of the sun. Like you go out, today it was nice and warm, but the sunlight's not too intense, and you're not going to get sunburn. I mean, I'm getting a little bit of colour up here, but you're not going to get too burnt. Okay, because the sun isn't too intense. Yes, it was a lovely sunny day. We saw some nice sun. It felt good, but the sunlight wasn't as intense as it would be in June, July. Okay, and definitely not as intense as the sunlight would be down in Spain. That's why we go there on holiday, or that's why we go and live out there when we retire. Okay, and so basically our trees, we can imagine that they have 40% less energy produced every year than the trees do in Spain. Okay, just simplifying it down. Okay, so how can we compensate for that? How can we try and push our trees forward at a quicker rate? Okay, how can we try and catch up? Okay, so what is photosynthesis? The amount of photosynthesis dependent on the synthetic area, the surface area, the photosynthetic surface area of the tree, which basically means how much foliage it has. The more foliage it has, the more solar panels it has, the more energy it can produce. The more energy it can produce, the more we can redistribute it to the areas where we wish it to go. Okay, and so the more energy we can produce up in the top, the more we can push down into these lower branches. Okay, the more energy gets produced in the top, the more energy will go into the roots, the quicker we can build on a barry. Okay, with the Zelkova from the other stream, you can see it's still alive. The more energy that gets produced at the top, where we had this big wound, okay, the more energy that gets produced above the wound and flows back down, the quicker that wound will heal. Okay, so how do we get more energy to be produced in lower intense, like in a situation where there's less intensity of sunlight? We increase the surface area. We make more growth. We allow our extensions to go out a little bit further. We allow our trees to get a little bit bushier. Rather than having 2 branches from one point, maybe we go for 3. Okay. There are always aesthetic considerations when we're working with bonsai. Okay, that's the second part of the sentence that I said, in order to achieve an aesthetically pleasing form. Okay, and so keeping those 3 branches at one point, for example, you can see where this might be going. Keeping those 3 branches at one point, for example, for multiple years is not a good idea. But maybe for 1 year, just in order to help keep the energy flow, energy production going, maybe we can live with 3 branches from 1 year. Okay, and then we take 1 off, and we only have 2, and we get down to our aesthetically pleasing form. So there's ideas and ways that we can get around it so that we've still got a large amount of photosynthetic material on the tree. So we're keeping the engine of the tree going, we're keeping the energy production going, and we're then able to sort of redistribute it into areas that we want them to be, where we want it to grow. But we're still working towards our aesthetic goals. Okay, so there's lots of different ways that we can do this. Okay, allowing things to extend out for a little bit longer. So, for example, with the beech pinching that we'll look at soon, maybe allowing it to go out to 5, 6, 7 leaves to extend out to about that length. Pinching the tip, allowing those leaves to harden off, and then cutting back a little bit later, rather than coming in straight away and pinching quickly. Okay, so there are ways, and we'll talk about that in more detail once we get there. There are ways of kind of increasing our surface area for temporary for shorter periods of time, so that we can compensate. Working with conifers, for example. Working with junipers. Junipers' work in the UK has been blighted. It's been plagued by people cutting them too much. Junipers are the best example of the requirement for photosynthetic surface area, so foliage. Okay, if you cut junipers back too hard, it has no way of generating any energy, goes into stress, sends out juvenile foliage. So the management of foliage on a juniper is the prime example of how you work with the energy production areas, and then how you push it into the areas that you want them to grow in order to create our aesthetically pleasing form. In Spain, in Japan, they can be a lot more aggressive. They can be much more aggressive with how much they prune them back, because there is more energy within the system. In more northern climates, in the UK, once you go further up north, we have to be a lot more thoughtful. We have to be a lot more careful with how much energy energy producing capability we take out of a tree, purely because 40% less sunlight. That's not to say we need to leave our trees completely bushy all the time. It just means that how aggressive we can be is, we're much less aggressive but we can do it on more frequent. We should be doing it on more frequent occasions, and so we're never pushing the tree too far back into energy negative situations. Okay, so more frequent but less aggressive prunings of trees is always a better way in less sunlight intense climates. Okay. It's all making sense, or am I losing you a lot, or are we here? Okay. Right. There's no. I didn't know how many people signed on to begin with, but we're at 69. 69 viewers. Okay. So, one of the most fundamental kind of things with this idea is knowing and being able to read kind of like the energy levels within a tree and have a good kind of like idea of what's going on. Okay. And being able to read the situation, being able to understand the tree. So, for example, whenever I go and do a workshop and I'm meeting trees for the first time, I'm always asking questions about when was it last repotted? What did it do last year? What did you do? How was it cut back? That's why working with the same people with the same trees over a number of years always ends up with the best results. Workshops we've been doing up at Willowbog, for example, the same people for, I don't know how long it's been going on, 6-7 years. The same people have been working on the same tree, so you know that history. You know what the tree did last year. You know what energy reserves it has. You know what happened. You can visualize in your mind how much energy is stored within the, like when we get to spring, when we're at this sort of time of year. You know how much energy is stored within the roots. You can gauge what it's going to do, and so you can tailor the way in which you work that tree to the energy level of it. When you meet a tree for the first time, you're just like, I'm not sure what to do with it. And so you don't know how aggressive you can be to the tree. You don't know how much energy there is in reserve. You don't know how much you can cut off because you don't know how it's going to respond. Okay, so you always got to have that kind of like what is going on with the energy of the tree in the forefront of your mind. Well, I do. Okay. And so being able to read the signs of health, vigour, energy is something that's very important. Obviously with deciduous trees, when they're out of leaf, it's very difficult. Okay, you can look at things such as the lignification of the branches. Okay, so these youthful branches here, we can see that this has grown a lot dramatically last year. Okay, there's been a lot of growth on this. Okay, very flexible and young, so there's going to be a lot of energy. We know that. It grew a lot last year. Okay, so there's going to be energy reserves in there, unless there was some kind of dramatic accident at some point. Okay, you can look at the age of the bark, things like this, the size of the buds as they're beginning to swell up. If you're kind of like meeting the tree for the first time. Okay, but other than that, it's then just kind of like gauging how the buds break, how it starts to push out. Okay, sort of looking at things like that will be able to enable you to kind of like read the tree's sort of situation, how much energy there is in it, and then you can start thinking about how we go about generating more, or redistributing what we have, or holding back. Okay, and this is where having a clear idea of what our aesthetic goals, where it comes in. Right, so we're not just talking about getting a tree healthy, okay, and just growing dramatically and generating as much energy as we possibly can. Okay, we need to consider our objectives for the year for each tree and how we're going to go about either generating more energy or redistributing the energy that we have, or trying to keep and trying to keep it in an aesthetically pleasing form by trying to generate as little as possible, or wasting energy. Okay, I've got a couple of trees where Scots pines where we get to July. Okay, so we're getting towards the second part of the year. The tree's generated a lot of energy. This tree's like super vigorous, it just generates loads of energy. I pinched the candles early on. This is going to be one of the ones that's going to be featured in Wednesday's stream. I pinched the candles pretty early on to stop the extension. It never gets any fertilizer. I try not to water it. Okay, I'm really holding it back, but it still wants to grow. Okay, so really holding it back. It gets to July. Okay, I cut a lot of the growth off. Okay, this year's growth, it's grown out, it's extended, cut it off, sets new buds. Okay, that's what Scots pines will do. It sets new buds. So cut off end of July. Okay, it sets new buds. By the middle of August, those buds are big and they're starting to swell. I'll go in, I'll cut them off again. I'm wasting energy. Right, so it's sending its reserves of energy into those new buds where we've cut off in July. Okay, so it sends some of that energy into those buds, and then I cut it off and waste it. That's how vigorous it is, and that's how much you've got to kind of like actively go in there and waste energy. Okay, so this idea comes in, and you can imagine, you can sort of visualize what's going on. Okay, I've got this goal for the tree. The tree's got a goal. Okay, and they're two very, very different things. Okay, and this is where the battle between us as humans who wish to have an aesthetically pleasing form in our bonsai and the trees as organisms, living organisms, comes in. Because what does a tree want to do? The tree wants to get big, it wants to generate as much energy as it possibly can, and it wants the species to continue. Right? It just wants to get big, wants to get efficient. All trees are interested in are efficiency. They don't care if they look beautiful or not. They don't care if they're aesthetically pleasing or not. Okay, much like myself. Okay, all they're interested in is efficiency and making sure that the next generation of their trees, of their species, continues. Okay, we want them to be aesthetically pleasing. We want them to grow in a certain way, and so there's always this battle between us and our cultural goals, our aesthetic goals, and the tree as a living organism. Okay, so for example, one way to look at that is through the tree that was featured recently. So this Scots pine. Okay, so this was featured in one of the kind of the pop quiz questions that I've been doing recently, and part of the question was, I put in part of the question, my goal for this tree is to basically keep it thin, keep it on the edge of death, basically. The concept of the literati tree is one of intense struggle. A literati tree that is incredibly healthy and vigorous and is showing signs of biogold, fish emulsion, health, is not a literati. Okay, a lot of people have argued this is a literati. I don't care about putting names on, but that kind of concept of the struggle of life is what we're trying to represent within a tree such as this. And so we're pushing it, we're actively pushing it towards the as close as we can to starvation, as close as we can to not growing. Okay, and when we're thinking about the energy levels within this tree, what we're trying to do is we're trying to end the year with about as much energy as we started the year, maybe just a little bit more. Okay, we're not looking to make it super vigorous. We're not looking to make the tree massively bulky, dense. We're looking to make this tree in particular, because of the style, because of my aesthetic, my personal desire for this tree, we're looking to make it just make a tiny little step forward in terms of its energy, but keep the tree healthy, keep the tree alive, keep the tree disease free. And that is the challenge for something like this. Okay, and that's why leading into this stream we deliberately did this one. Okay, it might look as though this is all a bit kind of like flying by the seat of our pants and just making it up as we go along, but there's a little bit of thought going into it. Okay, and so how we can try and visualize this and think about it, one of the things that I say to a lot of the students and people I work with is if we say that the tree is now starting off the year with 100 units of energy. Okay, it's just an arbitrary number. Okay, we're not measuring them. There's no way of measuring it, but we're just saying, okay, it's an easy to understand figure because we can talk about percentages and things like that. Start the year with 100 units of energy. Okay, for this tree, what I want is to end the year with 105, 110 units of energy. We want to make just an incremental increase. We don't want the tree to get super healthy. Okay. For the Zelkova, right? It started this year in January. It started off with 100 units of energy. Okay. After we worked on it, well, I worked on it the other day and chopped massive amounts of the tree out. It went from 100 units of energy down to 60 because we threw wood away, we threw buds away, we threw all of that potential energy that was stored there from last year, we threw it in the bin before it even had a chance to open up. And so the tree's dropped down in how much energy it has within the system. We want to end the year with 200 units of energy. We want the tree to be super healthy and super vigorous. We need this wound to heal, we need these branches to thicken, we need growth. Okay, so how do we get growth? Photosynthesis. That is how we get it. Okay, how do we get more photosynthesis? We put it in as sunny a spot as we possibly can. We get as many leaves on it as we possibly can. And this is where fertilizer comes into play. Fertilizer in and of itself does not add energy to the tree. It doesn't give the tree any more energy. The only thing that gives the tree energy is extra photosynthesis. What fertilizer will allow you to do is to get more photosynthesis by pushing growth. So the fertilizer will push the growth. It will give the tree the building blocks, the resources it needs to extend out, to have more leaves on, so it can generate more energy that we can then redistribute where we want it to go. Okay, but giving the fertilizer just to itself, just to a tree, isn't going to give the tree any more energy. If you have a sick tree which has barely any foliage on it, right, and you give it lots of food, it's not going to give it energy. Right? It could, in fact, cause the opposite in terms of killing roots off and making it much more difficult for the tree to photosynthesize. Okay, so giving a tree fertilizer doesn't give it energy. So there's energy and fertilizer, two different things, very closely linked, but we have to always remember about the photosynthesis aspect. And one of the biggest problems that a lot of people have had previously has been cutting off too much foliage at the wrong times. There are times to cut off foliage, initial styling such as this, and then there are times to not cut off foliage. Okay, and always approaching it, hacking things back all the time, won't necessarily achieve our aesthetic goals. Okay, in a short period of time. A lot of people say you got to be patient to do bonsai. Patience doesn't pay the mortgage. Right? I'm not patient. I want to be. I'm like a tree. Got that be efficiency. Okay, we got to be as efficient as possible so we can beat the Spaniards. Right? Not that it's competition, but we've got to be as efficient as possible. Okay, and so we need to think about how we can maximise our shorter growing season, our less intense growing season. Okay, keeping more foliage on, cutting back less and less but more frequently. Okay, and such like. Okay, but this idea of kind of like the 100 units of energy. We'll just sort of circle back and go to that, because this is kind of like an important thing. Because once we've got this idea of 100 units of energy, then we can start to think about how those units get used throughout the year, and then how we can redistribute them. Okay, and so what we'll look at is, I made this fancy graph. You can't hear me talking. Just a sec. I need to add the microphone to this. Something I didn't do. Here we go. I knew there'd be some technical issues. Okay. There we go. So you should be able to hear me whilst we're talking about this. If you can't, then you're just going to be staring at this graph for forever. Right. So we look at the energy levels in the tree across the year. Right, so we have 100 units of energy in January and February because the tree's sat there dormant, doing nothing. All right, we're talking about a deciduous tree. Okay, then we get to March, and the tree starts to use some of its energy. It starts to wake up, the buds start to open up. Okay, and so it's using all of these reserves of energy, and it starts pushing. So March through to April, it's pushing, using that energy, and we drop down. Okay, so let's just, for argument's sake, it drops down to 70 units of energy. Okay, those new leaves start to open out, start to photosynthesize, and we start to generate some energy back. All right, so the tree's expended some energy, and it's yet to get any investment, any sort of return on its investment back, right, until those leaves start to really open up and start to photosynthesize. So May, June, July, August, September, in that the middle summer part, we see the more intense kind of like increase in energy, and then once we get into the latter part of the year, then it sort of stops off. Okay, so I hope you could hear me all whilst I was talking through that. Right. So I hope you could sort of see that. So that's how like a normal tree would behave with no kind of like interaction from a human. Okay, by not pruning anything off. Okay, that's just how trees would do it. So they'd spend some of their energy in the spring growing out, but not all of it. Okay, they always keep sort of energy in reserve. Okay, so they'll keep it there just in case something happens. 2017, for example, we had -6 degrees and really hard frosts on the 4th of May, something like that. So all of my maples were out in the garden. I was in Japan at a World Convention. Okay, all the leaves were out, and they got absolutely annihilated. Okay, just every single leaf got just decimated on the tree. Okay, but none of those trees had died. Okay, so if we go back to that graph, when we look at it, okay, so at May it lost all of the leaves, and so it then had to spend more. Okay, and so it went down even further. Okay, it started sort of dipping into its reserves, dipping into its savings, which is what we're doing at the moment because none of us are working. Well, some of you are, some of you are on sick pay and everything, but not me. All right, so you start dipping into your energy reserves. Okay, but eventually those leaves came back out. I just left that full year of free growth, allowed full extensions, not worried about any kind of aesthetic ideas at all for that year because I knew the tree had suffered and lost more energy than normally it would have done. Okay, and so we had to compensate for that extra loss, the extra work that tree had to do in order to get back to a good level, back to normal, back to 100 units of energy and then maybe a little bit extra. Okay, those trees are all doing absolutely fine. One of them's in Michael's garden, okay, over in Ireland. Okay, but if we look at how that kind of idea works with I need to add the microphone to, sorry, I knew there would be something, audio input capture, add existing truss mic, okay. So if we look at how we can kind of utilize that for particularly like for a refined tree in terms of sort of defoliation, and again we'll talk about this later on in the year in more detail, but this is essentially what it is. So that yellow line there is what a normal tree would do. Starts the year off with 100 units of energy, ends with 200. Okay. When we are looking at holding back our more established trees, when we're looking at ending the year with only an incremental more amount of energy than we started with, so for example with a refined maple, then what we will be looking at is a reduction in photosynthetic surface area during the summer months. Okay, so the trees start off the same. January, February, they do nothing. The energy levels stay the same. Starts to expend energy in March and April. Okay, then we're getting into May and it's starting to recover some of that energy. Okay, through photosynthesis. Get into June, those leaves have hardened off, right? And then we cut half of them off, or we cut them in half. We reduce them down in size. We make the tree do some more work, so it spends more energy. Goes down in July. Right, but then we have the new foliage that comes out, or the smaller leaves generate less energy, and then we get back to our 100 units of energy point by September. Then we add a little bit of extra once we get into December, into the end of the year. Sorry, somebody just sent me a text message about testicles and coronavirus. So. This is this is just a visualization, just a general kind of idea. Okay, so people out there don't get too kind of like bogged, but that's basically how the use of energy in trees kind of operates, and how we can then kind of think about how we can manipulate the energy production capabilities of trees in order to achieve our goals. Okay, so with deciduous trees, maples, Zelkovas, it's very easy to visualize because we have leaves and we're used to defoliating. We take the leaves off in order to achieve certain goals. Okay, so one of the goals of partial defoliation or full defoliation is to create more ramification for some people, but it's also a way of making sure that the tree just kind of like just treads water, doesn't get too far ahead of itself, doesn't get too vigorous, too energetic. Cutting leaves in half with beech, hornbeams, things like that is a way of reducing the surface area of leaves in order to make them generate less energy, so that by the end of the year we're only one step ahead rather than 5. Okay, it's very easy to kind of visualize that. With pines, we have the same thing. Okay, so the reduction of needle mass, so plucking some of the needles, is one way of maintaining surface area. When we're going to look at candle pinching in the next stream, that's one way. The reason why we pinch the candles is to stop them extending out, to stop them having so many needles on them, so that they're not generating far too much energy for the future going forwards. So it's a way of energy control. Right? And when we start doing that, when we start stopping the energy from going to the tips, that's when we're also looking at redirecting it, and we're looking at pushing it back into the tree, making that energy come from somewhere else. And this is why this is where that sort of redirection of energy sort of comes into play. Because as I said earlier, the tree just wants to be efficient. The tree just wants to grow upwards, outwards, become as big and as large a surface area as it possibly can. That way it can generate more energy. It starts the year off with 100 units, it'll end the year with 200, 300 more. Okay, if it sends all of its energy to the top, to the outsides. Trees are not stupid. They're designed for efficiency and for maximum return on their investment. So they start off the year with 100 units of energy. Right, where are they going to invest it? Are they going to invest it at the top of the tree, or are they going to invest it in this dingle dangle branch down here? They're not going to, no tree in its right mind is going to invest it here. Okay, it's going to invest on the extremities because they get more sunlight, because they get more photosynthesis in that area, and so for every unit of energy that that tree invests in this area, it's going to get 2, 3 back. So it's going to end the year with more energy. It can store that energy in its roots, it can grow bigger, it can grow stronger, it can continue the species of Pinus sylvestris. Okay, it's not going to invest in dingle dangle branches which aren't going to get as much sunlight, which aren't going to photosynthesize. Okay, it's not going to invest too much on the buds on the inside. Okay, it will invest some because it's clever and it knows that something might happen to it, and it might need those buds and might need those branches in the future. Okay, things happen. The tips of branches get torn off. For example, with black pines, they're designed to be able to cope with the loss of their growing tips. Okay, and so that's all that trees are interested in, is that becoming efficient, becoming bigger and stronger. Okay, and we have to understand how it does that, and it does that through the use of hormones. So these strong areas create a hormone, auxin, which says, give me all of your energy. Give me all of your energy and I'll give you 2, 3 times as much back. That's what that mechanism is doing. Okay, and so it just draws all of the resources. Okay, so this tree is deciding, right, okay, I'm going to spend my energy where I'm going to spend it, and these tips here, the apexes, the extremities, are saying, give it to me, I'm going to give you loads of money back. Right, and so it does. It sends it there. Right, so at times like that, okay, we have to then, when we want it to grow into an aesthetically pleasing form for us, we then have to go in there and start saying, no, I don't want you to grow there. I want you to grow here. I want the dingle dangle branch to get a little bit stronger. And so we start messing with that mechanism. We start cutting off the tips. We start pinching tips. We start cutting the auxin producing sites back, so that the energy then gets redistributed elsewhere. That's all we do with bonsai. We allow the tree to generate the energy, and then we push it into the areas that we want it to. So that sentence that I came up with, this is what it is in action. Okay, so that it looks attractive. So as I sort of mentioned, these are aesthetic requirements or aesthetic goals that we have to have very clearly in mind, and then we have to have that balance between the tree's requirements for health and vigour and photosynthesis and generating the energy, and then our requirements for a sparse looking tree. Okay, if I went in and took too many needles off and made it look even sparser, then is the tree going to be able to cope? Okay, is the tree going to be able to then photosynthesize enough, generate enough energy? What am I going to then do with the new growth? So all of these things kind of like sort of come into play, and we have to start thinking about it. Okay, so really sort of having a good sort of fundamental sound idea of like the energy that's contained within a tree and then how we use it is something which has really helped me with my bonsai practice and kind of like achieving the goals with styling trees that I want to. And so, for example, you kind of really got to be careful with styling a tree that's too weak, for example, that doesn't have enough energy. If you go in there and start redirecting energy that doesn't exist, what's going to happen? Right? It's like the government spending money that it doesn't have. Right? In order for the economy to work, in order for things to work, money has to be raised and then spent. Okay, you can't spend money that you don't have, otherwise you end up with a massive credit card bill. At the end of the day, you can't pay it. What happens? You're homeless, you're living out on the streets. Right? With trees, it's the same. We've got to generate that energy first in order to then redirect it. And so when we come and we look at weak trees that have just been freshly collected, for example, or trees that have had some kind of like major catastrophic incident, dried out, all the roots have died off, foliage has been scorched, annihilated by the frost and things like that. We then have to think, okay, how can I build up the energy within this tree? And it really is quite simple. Get more photosynthetic surface area. That's the only way. Okay, there are lots of factors in order to get that. So, for example, if you have a tree with a very poor root system, okay, the way in which you're going to get more photosynthesis on top is by ensuring that you get the correct balance of water and oxygen within the soil, so that the tree can then use what limited resources it has to grow new roots, which will then be able to support more foliage, which will then be able to support more roots, which will then be able to support more foliage, and then the cycle goes up, and then the growth starts going off, and it goes exponentially. Okay, but ultimately, whatever path we go along in terms of that, fundamentally our goal is to get more foliage on the tree, so that there's more energy production, so that we can then redistribute it wherever we want it to go. And those people who are the most successful at bonsai are those people who can read the energy levels in the tree and have an understanding of how much there is, how far it can be redistributed, and what the results of that redistribution are going to be. How much energy, cutting branches off is a good example of a redistribution of energy. You're taking energy off of the tree. You're taking the energy generation capability off of the tree. Okay, and throwing it in the bin. Literally throwing it in the bin. Okay, and some trees will be able to kind of cope with that, other trees won't be. So, where was I going with this? I was doing really well up until now. Being able to read it, and those people who are very good at reading it are those people who have the most sort of success with it. And so this goes back to that thing that I was talking about in the fertilizing stream about empathy. Okay, and being empathetic with the trees. That's either cognitive empathy, so being able to think and put yourself in that position and actually go through it, logical steps. All the things that we've kind of like talked about today have been really quite logical. Right, it's just going through a thought process. You look at the tree and think, okay, how much photosynthetic surface area has it got? Okay, so it would have generated this much energy, and I reckon there's going to be this much in the roots. I'm looking at the buds. I can see that those buds are big. I can see the candles are extending out really, really dramatically, and so you can kind of look at it and cognitively think about. You can write it down on a piece of paper, do some equations, whatever you want to do. Not really, but you can sort of think it through. Those people who can just look at it and feel it are those people who have the green fingers, the green thumbs, and naturally very good plantsmen. Right? They've got a really good idea of the energy levels within the tree quite naturally. Okay, and so how I've kind of been able to visualize bonsai myself has been through this idea of what are we doing with the energy levels of the tree, and it's really kind of like worked for me. And this is how I describe a lot of processes. Okay, and so we're going to go through other streams. Hopefully, you've not been put off too much by this, and this concept will keep cropping up, and we'll keep talking about it and going back into it. Those people who watch Mirai Live, I'm sure Ryan talks about the energy levels in trees a lot, because it is something which is fundamental to bonsai. Okay, he comes at it from a slightly different perspective. I come at it from another perspective, based on our respective educations, based on our respective experiences and stuff like that, and how you might see trees and how you might visualize it will be different, and that's fine. Okay, but really kind of like thinking about how much energy a tree has, and then what can I do with that energy, having a clear aesthetic idea of what the style is that you want. I have a very clear, a very specific idea for this tree, right, which is starvation, which is struggle. Right, it's going to be a difficult one to achieve. The knife edge between life and death, you can fall off that very easily. Right? I could make this tree super healthy, gangbusters, vigorous, easily, absolutely just easy. The root, if you saw the video of it, the root health on this is just phenomenal. Okay, I've now got to keep this tree treading water, doing as little as possible. That is the aesthetic that I'm going for with this tree. That is my aesthetic vision for it, and so I need to manage the energy levels within this tree in a very specific way, and that way is making the root ball, the planting, as small as possible, giving it as little water as possible, giving it as little fertilizer as possible, but keeping it healthy and keeping it going forward, but at a very slow pace. And this is where a lot of kind of like very classical Japanese bonsai, a lot of the old school Japanese bonsai, what Japanese bonsai was like 60, 70, 100 years ago, was really about. And those trees had phenomenal character. They had character which was very subtle, very, very delicate, very difficult to perceive. Okay, unless you had empathy and were able to kind of like pick up on those smaller details and things like that. And that's what I'm trying to achieve with this tree. Okay, with other trees, we're trying to achieve a completely different aesthetic goal. Okay, with this one we're going to look at creating a burst of Zelkova, youthful sort of clump, foresty type style, lots of sort of vigour coming out of that. And so our energy requirements, our energy, the way in which we redistribute the energy, or the way in which we manipulate it, is going to be completely different. We're going to be fertilising this tree a lot, we're going to be pushing it, we're going to be getting lots and lots of growth, and then we're going to be looking at redistributing it in such a way that we achieve that. Okay, we're going to be looking at growing it out, cutting it back, growing it out, cutting it back. With the pine, we're just going to be looking at trying to not make it grow, and those are two completely different things. The way in which we're going to be creating the energy and then redistributing it are going to be very, very different. Okay, so that was a long meandering load of talk. I'm just looking at the questions. Okay, so we'll answer a few of those questions. Right. I was art designer for a band merch. Okay, thank you very much. Omelette Ollie, yeah, can you send me an email? Jose Redondo has 2 hats. That's very nice. Okay. Bonsai. Thank you very much, John. I hope you're still here. Right. Image and sound are much better tonight. Yes, we're on the new computer. Thank you for your donations. That makes sense. All good. So just comments. Thank you very much. Right. Oh, we finally have a question. Have you ever used LED grow lights to increase light levels? Yes. So one of the things that we do, particularly with junipers and conifers, not so much the pines, but definitely junipers, hinokis here, is we do use not LED grow lights, but we do use grow lights over the winter in order to keep the trees kind of like ticking over, keep the energy levels of them that ever so slightly, just gives it 5% boost, 10% boost. Okay, and that enables us to kind of like get a running start in the spring. So yeah, definitely grow lights are a major sort of component for really kind of keeping the energy levels of evergreens up over the winter months. However, for example, white pines, I definitely wouldn't be doing that. I would be looking at actually putting them in as cold and as dark a place as possibly could, because one of the reasons that seedling white pines, majority of seedling white pines, particularly those from the Shikoku area, which is one area of Japan where these pines come from, do really, really badly in the UK, is that it's not cold enough. Okay, so they never go truly dormant. And one of the problems that we have in the UK particularly is that our trees, for the most part, our winters aren't really sort of severe enough in order to make our trees go properly dormant. Okay, and so those trees which are expecting dormancy, those white pines in particular, right, they're banking on it. They're like, okay, I'm for 2 months of the year I'm going to be asleep. I'm going to be hibernating. I don't need to have any energy within my system moving around. I'm going to go to sleep for 2 months, 3 months, and then I'll be ready for the spring. So essentially they're banking on 9 months of growing season, of being awake, 3 months of being asleep, just for argument's sake. When they come over to the UK, where, for example, it doesn't get quite cold enough, or they're in Tokyo, or they're in areas of Japan where it doesn't get quite cold enough, this is, or you keep them in a greenhouse over the winter, you keep them awake, you keep them just ticking over you, they're just kind of like, oh jeez, I want to go to sleep, I can't, and they're just expending a little bit of energy, they're not having that rest. Then they get slowly tireder and tireder and tireder, and that energy level just drops down. In Japan, for example, it's fine because they have that intense sunlight, so they can kind of pick up back up in the summer. Whereas in the UK, those lower light levels, the lower intensity, because we're a little bit higher up the globe, the world, the earth, and so they basically just kind of get tireder and tireder and tireder and tireder. There are varieties of white pines that don't do that, particularly the grafted ones they're absolutely fine, things like that. And some of the other seedling white pines will be fine. But in order to really help them, what I would be looking at doing is trying to keep them as cold, dry, and dark as possible over the winter. Okay, deciduous trees, obviously, without leaves, don't need any light at all over the winter. Thank you very much, Morton. Can you discuss? Please feed us more. So grow lights mean you have to work harder to rebalance energy. So Simon says grow lights mean you have to work hard to rebalance energy. What grow lights do, and what having more foliage does, means that you have more to redistribute. Okay, and so yes, you have to work a little bit harder, but what it does mean is that you can reach your aesthetic goals quicker. Okay, because you've got more to play with. Okay, so it's like investing. If you've only got £100, $100 to invest, you're only going to get a small return on your investment. But if you've got 1,000, you get more. Okay, if you're trying to paint a picture, you've got 2 colours. It's not going to be a very interesting picture. But if you've got more and more colours, you can create a much more interesting painting picture a lot quicker. So the more energy you have, the more you have to play with, the quicker you can make a very interesting tree. So yes, it does mean that you have to work harder at redistributing it, but that's a good thing. If one branch on a maple is very weak, would you let that one branch extend and prune back on others and feed well? Yes, Caroline, that's what I would do. However, if that branch is so weak that it's going to be kind of like holding back the development of the rest of the tree. So for example, if you have a weak branch, it's going to take you 3, 4, 5 years in order to get that branch to strengthen up, because you need to allow it to grow out. In that 4, 5, 6 years, what's going to happen to the rest of the tree if you're just constantly holding it back, right? Potentially what you might need to do is look at a completely different design where you cut that weak branch off and just do something completely different, because 5, 6 years down the line, if you've cut the branch off, you've got to you've got to a final result. Whereas if you spend 5 or 6 years just strengthening this one branch, okay, then you've still then got to go through another 4 or 5 years of building up ramification, building up secondary, tertiary branch structure and stuff like that. So it's a difficult call. You would need to see the tree in order to make that kind of judgment. But yes, in order to strengthen up weak branches, you do need to let them grow out, so you've got more foliage on them, so that they have more auxin producing shoots, which demand more energy, which then creates more foliage, which then creates more energy. Just go. Okay. Should all species in the UK be grown in full sun? Okay, the white pine thing as well. It's not just the cold as well. One of the big issues is the water, the amount of water that and frequency of repotting. White pines hate being repotted, and they really suffer badly if you go in and cut the roots and stuff like that. The white pines that I have here that are doing the best, they've never been repotted, and they never will be. Okay, if I can help it, they might get the pot might get changed, the surface may get cleaned up a little bit and stuff like that. But basically, they could just survive in that same space for as long as we can sort of keep the water going in. What happens with that sort of very sort of tight root ball thing is the roots die off, create some space, new roots grow into that space. White pines don't like being taken out, roots being cut off of them too much. Okay, so there are other reasons for that. Okay, should all species in the UK be grown in full sun? Pretty much as much full sun as you can get until we get into the absolute kind of like heat of the summer. Weaker trees as well, maybe that have compromised root systems, that maybe aren't quite as able to cope with sudden and dramatic changes in temperature and things like that, should be kept in the shade. But realistically, as much sun as we possibly can. We have shade tolerant species, like for example Taxus are very shade tolerant, right? So they will grow in the shade. Right? Maples will grow in the shade, azaleas will grow in the shade, but they will grow better in the sun. Once we start hitting temperatures plus 30 degrees centigrade, whatever that is in Fahrenheit, that's when you have to start thinking about, okay, maybe we start taking it out of the sun, because the trees maybe are not able to kind of like take moisture. There's a lot of factors which come into the putting things like into full sun or not. But ideally, if they've got strong root systems, if you've got the capability of doing it, then give them as much sun as possible can. What about white pines in summer full sun? They do they like hot temperatures also? Yes, the hotter the better, up to around about 36, 37 degrees centigrade. They'll go even hotter than that, as long as the temperature in the evening drops down. One of the big issues with growing bonsai in Tokyo is that, for example, the daytime temperature in the middle of the summer could be 37 degrees centigrade. Okay, and then the nighttime temperature could be 36. Okay, because Tokyo is a concrete city. It's full of air conditioning units that are pumping out heat. The heat reservoir of all the concrete basically doesn't allow any heat to escape, and so the diurnal temperature difference is very, very small. Whereas you go up onto the mountains, the daytime temperature could be the same 37 degrees, but then it goes to the evening, temperature drops down dramatically. Okay, and so that's trees are, particularly pines are they're really happy to be in hot climates. They've got the capability of closing themselves off, of stopping evaporation too much. They protect themselves against the extreme heat and things like that very well. But what they also need is that nobody can do it 24 hours a day. They need that time to just kind of like relax, and they need the temperature to drop down for various things to happen. Metabolic processes and things like that. And so really high temperatures too much will mess up trees. Okay, right. So when you talk about 2018, I noticed pretty much all of my deciduous trees stopped growing. Was this because of the higher intensity of solar energy or heat? Yeah, I mean, once trees kind of like, they'll reach a point, and they're making sort of decisions. Essentially, they're kind of like making a decision about the more leaves I put out, the more they've got to kind of like support them, and things like that. And so, with a fixed root mass, essentially there might be, you know, the sort of kind of be. Sorry, people. More questions coming in. You know, it's like making it depends on the time of the year as well. The trees will always kind of like essentially sort of stop growing by the middle towards the late part of summer, and then they start thinking about the, you know, because they've generated as much energy as they need to. If they then send out second flushes of growth, like later than say August, there is a possibility that early frosts could come in and damage them and stuff like this. So they're kind of they're designed to kind of like work within sort of those sort of seasonal parameters, so that they're not potentially sort of wasting any energy and things like that. So yeah, I mean, excessive heat can stop trees from growing. Sort of said about one of the factors of photosynthesis is heat. You know, once you start getting above a certain temperature, then, you know, proteins actually start breaking down. You know, things that start to stop, and so trees will then sort of slow themselves down and focus on losing as much heat as they possibly can. And so, you know, there are factors which will affect the growth of trees once you start getting up to those extreme temperatures. And so potentially that could have been what was happening. It's really difficult to answer like sort of general, sort of real specific questions about these things, which is why I'm kind of like trying to do like a general kind of like overview of what it is, and then you can try and apply those to those different sort of situations. So for example, I have a crab apple that's blooming with foliage. Could I trim back now, or by your graph it's still rebuilding energy? So yes, there will be a certain amount of kind of like rebuilding energy, but you might be looking at trying to keep it at that kind of like plateaued level. Okay, and so you've just got to make sort of judgment calls about what, you know, sort of like how to deal with those, you know, that energy, things like that. Recently repotted a month ago 3 young Scots pine. I pinched candles down to 2 and pulled off last year's growth. Should I wait for styling in autumn? Yes, you should. Never do too much work to trees all in too much a short period of time. Again, they've got to be able to sort of recover from certain procedures, repotting being one of them. So yeah, I would definitely wait. So final question, and then we're going to say goodbye. Ari, my 2018, could this be cheated by applying shade? Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I will grow quite a few of my trees under shade cloth in order to just, you know, to keep them growing for a certain extent, and particularly those weaker trees that are maybe unable to cope with that excessive heat. Do we have summer dormancy in the UK? Sometimes, but very rarely. Is it like a long period of summer dormancy? Basically, the trees will get to a point in the middle of the summer where they're going to stop growing, and then they're just starting to sit there and think about what they do with their energy. That's when they're starting to redistribute it. So in July, we start to see white pines, Scots pines setting buds for next year, and that's when we then go in and start to do our work on redistributing the energy, and we start looking at cutting things back. And so we will get to those points as and when the year progresses. But yes, okay, so we're gonna call it a night there. We'll try to keep it at under an hour because I've not had any dinner yet, and so I'm getting a bit hungry. So yes, thank you all. I hope it wasn't too much of a too sort of crazy and just too much of a what's the word I'm looking for? Stream of consciousness nonsense. And it is a bit of a weird kind of concept to kind of get for some people, I think. Other people will look at that and will kind of like say, oh yes, I understand that, particularly if you're of a particularly like maybe a scientific bent. But the one thing that I do want to just kind of like say again is that it's all the thing is about having that clear aesthetic goal. Okay, that is one of the key part of that sentence that I said in terms of there it is. Let's get that back up. It's one of the key things is to have that achieve an aesthetically pleasing form. Okay, that's what our ultimate goal is. Okay, we just have to base what the tree wants and what we want, so that we're both happy. Okay. So the next stream will be I don't know, Tuesday, Wednesday for certain. Scots pines are growing quite a lot, and so I've got to go around and have a look at how things are going. There's a few that need pinching already. What's that? And the beer of the night is so I've got to go around and have a look at what needs pinching and what doesn't, and sort of see if we can get enough information for stream. So yeah, it's going to be about pines. So if anybody has any sort of questions about them or any questions about this, then please get in contact through the usual channels, social media, email, website, etc, etc. And if anybody has any sort of constructive criticisms about the way in which these are operating, can help out with designing logos or whatever, just please kind of like get in contact. As I said previously, these are all free live streams, and you're welcome to them. We will. A lot of people have been supporting us, and if you would like to kind of like show some financial love, then you can go to the blog page, which is just up on the chat there. I'll put it up in the video link for tomorrow, and stuff like that. If you don't want to, it's fine. If you do, please, thank you very much. And it'll just help us to kind of like keep doing this, and also think about doing this going forward in the future, because obviously with the coronavirus and everything is up in the air, and how we've been operating previously. One of the reasons why I've not done anything like this is because we've always been travelling around and working with people. Obviously that's now stopped, and that was going to stop anyway in the future due to circumstances here. We were looking at travelling less, and so perhaps doing this a lot more regularly in the future. But obviously we've got costs and mortgages to pay and all that kind of stuff. So we'll just sort of figure it out as we go along. But yes, so thank you very much if you do donate. We will actually look at doing some kind of like maybe donors question and answer session as well. Just got to figure out how to do that, so that only people who have supported us can kind of get in on that, and also some free ones as well, because a lot of people have the questions, specific questions, so we'll look at doing that. Okay, so keep an eye out on Facebook, Instagram and everything for all of that. If you did miss any of this, the video will be up on YouTube afterwards as well. And yes, I think that's probably about it really, apart from this evening has been brought to you in association with where are we? Here we go. Timothy Taylor's Landlord. Thought we'd go back to the origins. Very good quality Yorkshire beer. And so yeah, I'll be enjoying this now, and I hope it's all been very beneficial for you, and maybe sort of change the way that you look at bonsai, or at least help understand what I'm banging on about all the time. So anyway, cheers. Good evening.